Have your attention, please. Have your attention. We are ready to resume our program. This is a very, very exciting moment for myself as well as the committee to introduce our keynote speaker. I started off the program with a little saying, and I'm going to say it again. Today is today, but tomorrow, but by tomorrow, today will be history. So don't take this day for granted, and be thankful for it. And do all and be all that you can be. This day, this time, this moment are your precious moments. Our speaker today graduated from Central High School in Philadelphia in 1973. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Swarthmore College and a Juris Doctorate degree from North Carolina Central Law School in Durham, North Carolina. He has had an astonishing career in law and began his work as a lawyer in the Montgomery County Public Defender's Office in 1984 and was a Public Defender of the Year in 1987 while trying over 100 jury and bench trials. Mr. Page was engaged in the practice of law for 20 years with Rogers, Page and Associates in Norristown from 1986 until 2006, until he opened and still maintains his own law practice in Plymouth Meeting. His own practice has included litigation before the courts of common pleas of Montgomery, Bucks, Philadelphia, Delaware, Chester counties, U.S. District Court, Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court. Mr. Page was elected 3 times to the office of the Montgomery County Treasurer in 1999, 2003, and 2007, where he was responsible for investing and overseeing a budget with over $500 million. He also served as the chairman of the County Investment Board. Mr. Page is also a community activist and also is associated with numerous professional affiliations. I will mention but a few. He serves on the Pennsylvania House of Delegates. He's on the Board of Trustees of Arcadia University. He received the Ambler Lodge No. 19 Award for Outstanding Leadership and Service to the Ambler-Abington communities in June 2008. He is also a member of the Board of Deacons at Salem Baptist Church, where he once served as past chairman, and I can tell you that's not an easy job, believe me. In 2009, Mr. Page served as a distinguished panelist right here in our last Black History Month celebration in this community room. The theme last year was Heal the Past, Live the Present, and Dream the Future. He gave us some good advice. But it seems that Mr. Page also listened to the beat of his own drum. The position he held as treasurer was a career that most people would have been content with, but he aspired to do more and to be more. You see, he too had a dream for the future when he announced that he was a candidate for the office of Judge of the Court of Common Pleas of Montgomery County. He became only the second African American to be nominated as a Montgomery County judge, the first being retired Judge Horace Davenport, who was elected to the county bench in 1975 and served more than 27 years, was the first. On January 4th, 2010, Mr. Garrett D. Page was sworn in as judge of the Court of Common Pleas of Montgomery County. He lives in Abington and is married to his wife, Olivia, and they have 2 children, Garrett and Lauren. It is with great honor and our privilege as the Black History Month Committee to present to you our keynote speaker of the day. No longer Mr., but now the Honorable Garrett E. Page, Comments Report for Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Good morning. What a prestigious day, what a great day. I think I probably could have continued to sit and told you that my speech was what you saw just a few minutes ago. If you reflect back on the many faces, there weren't just African Americans, there were folks from every walk, every different shade. And diversity, I think you use that term, and sometimes that's the word we have grown to just enjoy in this very eclectic world. It is my honor to occupy this space. I thank Garfield and the committee that has asked me to be here. I have, I guess since I've been judge, I've got to get used to the term honorable as opposed to dishonorable. And I guess it was a wake-up call when the sheriff's, one evening when I was walking to my car, working late, they said, Judge, we have to walk you to your car, and I'm not used to that kind of treatment. But it is indeed a distinct honor to be here, to join with the dancers, the singers, and certainly a beautiful day. This room is always occupied with the history that this county has deemed it not robbery to set aside for Black history. And we should enjoy that day every day, and I think that's coincident with your theme, 365 days of Black history. Amen to that. I recently talked in front of 500 students from age 5 to 10 at the school, Glenside Elementary near Abington, Glenside. And one of the questions that they left me with was, Judge, why do you wear the black robe? I have a black suit on, I have a black folder. I struggled, I wasn't expecting that question, and I guess my answer had to do something with the fact that it's a color of prestige, honor, authority, certainly a prestigious month of February, a prestigious people, Black, the color, Black. I want to talk to you a little bit about how important this day and how I got to get from the road from the early 1600s to what I call the Plessy to Page range, and I'll tell you about the significance of that. I recently resaw the movie The Great Debaters, and if somebody of you have seen that with Denzel Washington, and we talked about a school called Wiley College in Texas, where in the 1930s, where these students were debating with the prestigious school of Harvard. And one of the closing speeches of the young lady who gave the closing speech as to whether or not it was appropriate to defer desegregation as opposed, or segregation and go into desegregation of schools was, she said, it is always time for justice. You cannot defer justice. But when is the time for justice? It is always right now. Always right now. And so some of the theme of what I want to talk to you about coincides with Dr. King's speech in 1965. Many of us remember the I Have a Dream speech, but some of us forget the speech that he gave that said, how long, not long. Remember that theme as I go forward. It was a very prestigious mark in my life on November 3rd, 2009, when I was elected only to be the second African-American judge of this county, followed the Honorable Horace A. Davenport, who served for over almost 3 decades. And the history of a county that we sit in right now, since 1784, that had only been one before me. So that was prestigious for me. Thank you. It was a road that I had to enjoy that took me over maybe a 15-year hiatus. But I had to remember constantly, the road to success is not something that just happens. It's not by happenstance. It's not by serendipity. It is through my Baptist faith, through prayers and faith. And I promised myself when I got up here to speak to you that I wouldn't sing, because in my campaign I said that because I wanted to win the election. And two, as a deacon in a Baptist church, I won't preach because I would have you here all day, and I have conferences later on, which will mean that I have to leave a little earlier. So I will leave what I would say in the Baptist church, the hooping portion of my presentation now. But the road to success, how do you get there? Certainly we have to reflect back on Black history. It compels us, our history compels us, in fact, to even look at some of the things that would cause us to grimace and maybe have grief over. And so there's two dynamics, things that happen even in the 1600s as it progresses us up to the years 2000. and that was slavery and segregation. Slavery and segregation. Certainly, I had to look back on a book that the autobiography of Booker T. Washington, who lived in the 1856 through 1915 era. And he wrote a book, Up From Slavery. Many of you may have read it. In it, he talks about the fact that slavery comes to the mind when one thinks about his forefathers, the oppression that we had to experience. He reflected on the slavery, the contributions of one who grew out that period. In fact, he was a derivative and actually a slave from his parents, a slave himself. He heard the whispered conversations among the colored people, they called them then, of the tortures which the slaves had to go through from the middle passage of the slave ship being conveyed from Africa to America. In his book, Up From Slavery, the slave system he talked about. He talked about the fact that the system itself made two dynamics. One, the slaves who did the cooking and the sewing, and they learned the skills of cooking and sewing and putting in labor. Whereas the slave traders and the slave owners, the girls that and the sons that they had, they were not taught how to cook, they were not taught how to sew or care for the house. All this was left to the slaves. The slaves, of course, had little personal interest in the life of the plantation, and their ignorance prevented them from learning how to do things in the most improved or thorough manner. What that meant was, as a result of that system of slavery, fences were out of repair, gates were in disrepair, hanging from the hinges, doors creaked, window panes were out, plaster fell, because the slaves themselves didn't have respect for what they did. They just did the labor. And as a byproduct, concomitantly, the slave owner and his sons had mastered no special industry. They did not know how to do the cooking, the sewing, and taking care of the house. So that you had that dynamic going on, juxtaposed to each other. The ironic dilemma that grew out of slavery, therefore, when it became time for the Emancipation Proclamation in the 1865 era, you had the slaves who had to go back and their freedom. If you saw the movie Shawshank Redemption, you know that the dynamic where the persons in the prison couldn't deal with the outside world, neither could the slaves. They found themselves going back to the homes that they came from and going back to the owners. And that wasn't good. Well, then you have to fast track. Then you go from the 1600s back, and I'm going to fast track it to even the late 1800s, where a case came into play called Plessy. And I said, Plessy to Page. This is the road to the judgeship in Montgomery County for me. I had to look back to Plessy. In that case, Plessy versus Ferguson. Many of you may have heard this case because it's the predecessor case to the Brown versus Board of Education case. And Plessy, it was a person who was only 7/8, he was 7/8 white and 1/8 black. I'm not sure how you become a fraction of any kind. But they chose Plessy because he could pass for white. And they put him in a railroad car, black-only railroad cars. In that time, you could not ride in the railroad car if you were black, even if you were 7/8 white. They chose him, and he lost that case, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it was one of the most shameful decisions of the Supreme Court in that time, who said that segregation was the way to go, that joining blacks and whites, and what you saw here, the joining that we have now in 2010, singing, was not the way that you could have harmonious. It wasn't congruent, it wasn't productive, it wasn't healthy. And that case went on. But was one justice in that case who wasn't shameful. That was Justice Harlan. This is what he said. The present decision will not only stimulate aggressions, more or less brutal and irritating, upon the admitted rights of colored citizens, but will encourage the belief that it is possible by means of state enactments to defeat the beneficent purposes which the people of the United States had in view when they adopted the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. Well, 60 years had to pass, folks, from Plessy, which said that you could not ride if you were even 7/8, 1/8 black in that car, to the case of Brown. And many of us remember that because that's more of our contemporary age, some of us at least, maybe not the young, who maybe they've read about this case. So 60 years of travesty had to go by, and even now there's some degree of desegregation. But there was a judge who I patterned myself after, and I have a pen that someone gave me, and many of you know this name, Thurgood Marshall, the Honorable Thurgood Marshall. And what happened is that he argued that case. Well, you have to remember that Thurgood Marshall argued a lot of cases in his history. Thurgood Marshall, it is said, had argued more than any judge and won more Supreme Court cases than any justice in the history of the United States. The significance of the likes of Thurgood Marshall by a road of Plessy is one example, just one example of the road from Plessy to Page. The lawyers that are local to this era that I liken myself and I highlight are those who I actually got to touch, who I got to sit down and talk to. I want to bring to your attention two of them. The Honorable Judge A. Leon Higginbotham and the Honorable Juanita Kidd Stout. They were mentors to me. I used to talk to them in their chambers, particularly Judge Stout. But let me tell you about Leon Higginbotham. Born in 1928, he attended a segregated high school in Trenton. And prior to him, no black student had been put on the academic track to college because back then you had to learn Latin to get into the college track. So he began working jobs, doing snow in the winter, doing lawns in the summer to earn money. And he even at the age of 15 manipulated his birth certificate so he could pass for a higher age to get into where he needed to get. At age 16, he enrolled in Purdue University, Indiana. He wanted to become an engineer, but he learned quickly that engineering wasn't the way to go. An unfortunate circumstance happened when he was at Purdue. The black students had to sleep in the attic where there was no heat. And he confronted the university president about this. How could you possibly bring me into this university and ask me to sleep where there's no heat? The president said to him, the law doesn't require us to even put you here, so take it or leave it. So what Higginbotham concluded was that maybe engineering wasn't the way to go, because he said an engineer could put together a gadget but which would not significantly do anything about oppression. So he shifted gears and he became a lawyer. And the story went that in 1949 he entered a prestigious school, Yale Law School, and then he became a U.S. Justice, U.S. District Court, and then he became appointed by President Carter to the United States Third Circuit Court of Appeal, which is the court that's right under the Supreme Court of the United States. Judge Higginbotham, a friend and a mentor, taught me those types of things, that there is a road that you have to take, even in the midst of oppression. Higginbotham went on to receive the Medal of Freedom from President Bill Clinton. Now, Judge Juanita Kidd Stout, she basically ran through the same era. And again, this is in the post-Plessy era, but leading into the Brown era when they lived. Judge Stout lived from 1919 to 1998. But in 1939, she became a school teacher. And then she went on to become a judge in the municipal court and the Court of Common Pleas, which is where I sit. The Court of Common Pleas being the highest state court that you can come before. These two legal giants, these two legal jurists, and Judge Stout would often ask me to come in her chambers, and she was big on at that time, the gangs, where she would take the gangs and the gang war leaders. This is a 5 feet, maybe 2 woman who was able to talk to the gang war leaders and tell them to take their guns off the street. And she was very much a proponent of the deprivation of the exclusion of black from juries, which were happening back then. And she was very big on grammar. In fact, she almost threw me out of her office one day when I spelled a word wrong. But she was big on that. She taught me civility. And these are the type of people that I had to lean on as I'm going through my trek to become a judge. Second African-American judge of Montgomery County. But I had to constantly chant to myself, how long? And King's speech said, not long. How long? Not long. I highlight these two, but there's many, many more. There's so many predecessors that I had to lean on, the shoulders, and even Judge Davenport, who taught me respect and for the honor of this court. But they certainly don't trump messianic bloodline from David to Jesus, but they certainly are part of what formed me, Garrett Page, and the beginnings of who I am, and probably will be on this bench. They certainly taught me those lessons. My presence here today is through one, that you invited me, two, that I have ascended to a position that you placed me in, and that God has very much given me favor. And one church I went to through the many that I went across this county was that God gives me the unbelievable, don't make no kind of sense favor. And some of my Zion shaking her head and some of the others. But that's what I lean back on. It's a combination of many of you, many of the judges that I had to lean on. I can mention many, many names, folks, but it's not, time doesn't permit. So I guess I said, well, Garfield said, come talk to this group. I said, what can I really tell you about other than the fact that I'm honored and that I wear the black robe? And I thought I'd give you a little bit of who I am and what made me. And I can tell you that part of it was because I'm one of 5 children to Bill and Evelyn Page, born in the row homes of Germantown. I lived in a gang territory called the Summersville, where there were zip guns and gunfights. Some of my colleagues back then, not even living now, I lived in what was called the Dave Richardson territory, which was the bottom side of Summersville. And many of you know State Representative Dave Richardson back then. He wore a dashiki, but he meant business. But he kept me off the streets. He taught me through my parents that even though I lived across the street from a recreation center, that most of what I did to stay out of trouble was to go and play baseball, where the field was directly across the street from me. I would go and play with a pimple ball, throwing it into a box, and it would have the meanest curve that you could ever think of. But those types of things taught me communicative skills. It taught me how to deal with people, and it taught me that you had to have hard work to succeed. So children, if they're still in the room, don't ever underestimate the many dots that you have to connect. The dots are not straight. They may go left or right, south, east, west. But the dots have to be connected in a way that God is directing you. And I learned that it has to sometimes take a slow pace. I went to the top schools. I went to Central. You learned Swarthmore, then to a historically black law school, North Carolina Central. After law school, I had to go through the other windy route to get to where I am now, through politics. I wanted to become a judge 15 years ago, but the theory was that I had to go through a route, and I became very favorably the county treasurer, would put me in contact with folks all over the state that would, lo and behold, become very important in my campaign to reach this pedestal. I am certain that Judge Juanita Kidd-Stout, I am certain that Judge Davenport, who has joined us, and Judge Higginbotham, had to take those same windy routes, and that as you, and as African Americans, we have thrived through being able to do that, through slavery, through desegregation, into segregated schools. But I had to learn to continue to trust in the Word, where in Luke it says, life is a test, but it's also a trust. And from everyone who has been given much, the Word says, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. God asked you to give those responsibilities. The more challenges my road took to become a judge, the more a believer I became in the book. I began to reread the book, The Purpose-Driven Life, by one of my authors, Rick Warren, and he quotes Isaiah 61 and says, for God has planted you like a strong and graceful oak for his own glory. And he said to figure out what Christ will want you to do and just do it. And folks, that's exactly what I had to do. It really comes down to be as simple as that. All the time, the struggles, the places that I had to go, the community days, the Simmons Parks, and the Pottstown community days, all that was very important. But it was a very windy route, and that's what sometimes our heritage tells us we have very much thrived in. So for me, I learned to do it that way, just as you and others that I leaned on had to do it. I could name a host of other predecessors that the time doesn't permit it, but the common thread, folks, is that the end result is a combination of all those things for me. So I continued to say to myself, well, how long? I've been trying to do this for so long. I've been trying, and it's a very much the aspiration that I want to get to be a judge. And so I kept on saying, how long? And King's Speech kept on coming back to me, how long? Not long. And I have to share with you some of the events that I had to keep on looking back of the accomplishments of African Americans who had to do the same sweat and toil that I had to get to their success pinnacle. Remember these events. In 1937, William Hastie became the former advisor to President Franklin Roosevelt. 1939, there was the popular Marian Anderson sang at the Lincoln Memorial. 1944, April 3rd, the United States in the Smith v. Allwright case declared white-only political primaries unconstitutional. 1945, Ebony magazine published its first issue on November 1st. 1947, Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. 1950, the consensus of the United States had the U.S. population at 150 million, and 10% of that was African American. 15 million black African population in 1950. Fast forwarding, we came to the Brown case, which Thurgood Marshall argued, that said, forthwith, you must desegregate schools and put blacks and whites together. And they would indeed thrive. The order said forthwith, but it would take another 10, 20 years to actually have it manifested. 1957, we had the Civil Rights Act. Then we fast forward. 1963, we had Martin Luther King write his letter from Birmingham jail, and then King didn't last long. He went through the civil rights era, and he was assassinated in 1968. Coming forward, we started to elect black mayors, Wilson Goode in 1984, Harold Wash in 1983, and then we had the elite Olympics in 1984, where Carl Lewis won 4 gold medals at the Olympic Games. We came through the era of O.J. Simpson, his acquittal, 1995, and then we had Barack Obama, who at that time was the first elected U.S. Senate from Illinois, only the 5th black U.S. senator in U.S. history. Then we had 2005, The Covenant with Black America, edited by Tavis Smiley, which climbed to #1 on the New York sellers list. And then you know the story. On November 4th of 2008, we elected our first African-American president of the United States. But yet, the chant continued for me. How long? Not long. How long? Not long. How well we recognize that popular speech that was given by Dr. Martin Luther King on the steps of the state capitol building in Montgomery, Alabama in 1965. When I look back at the impressive history of all the accomplishment of our people, when I say our people, there's a diverse in this group, in this room, considering all that one must go through, all I had to go through to get to where I wanted. I continued to have to chant this how long, not long speech. The electoral process was long. The circuity of the route was long. It wasn't a very windy route. But so the chant remained resounding. So I had to identify with the speech that King gave in 1965, that our God, he ended it with, our God is marching on. How long? The speech came back and reverberated from the crowd. Not long. This is what he said. Listen to it. When will wounded justice, lying prostrate on the streets of Selma, Birmingham, and communities all over the South, be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men? When will the radiant star of hope be plunged against the nocturnal bosom of this lonely night, plucked from weary souls with chains and fear and the manacles of death? How long will justice be crucified and truth buried? I come to say to you this afternoon, said King, however difficult the moment, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because the truth crushed to earth will rise again. How long? They chanted back. Not long, because no lie can live forever. How long? They chanted back. Not long, because you shall reap what you sow. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne, yet the scaffold sways the future. And behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? They chanted back. Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And the bending towards justice is what I really latched on to. He again chanted. How long? They chanted back. Not long. How long?
Not long.
He then ended. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And he sang. I continued to, that was 1965. We're in year 2010. I began my trek to become endorsed in 1995. I had to continue to chant that King's speech. How long? Not long. So again, in the midst and backdrop of 2010, Black History Month, the many things that are going to happen here today, we have incredible hope. We have incredible hope because the Word tells us that hope doesn't disappoint us because he has poured out the Spirit into our lives. We have come through so far, and our faith undergirds us with great, great strength. I am certain that it undergirded myself and Judge Davenport and Higginbotham and Stout and Thurgood Marshall and all the other African-American jurists that reached where I have to sit. In the last almost 2 months, I've had a chance to sign orders of the court. And I will have a chance to sit on death penalty cases, in cases that will have our diverse groups come in front of me, custody, folks who are broken down, who have lost their siblings and want to rejoin with their siblings, and they have to be sent to jail, and they need to have justice done in regard to civil cases, criminal cases, and family cases. You have given me the opportunity, and when I chant, no longer the chant is how long, not long. But it may be you have another similar chant. How long will my bills continue to rise up? Not long. How long will my children be in jail? Not long. How long will the bill collectors continue to go after me? I know this doesn't sound true, but not long. I don't see too many shaking heads. But the chant goes on and on. But remember what King said, and what I still have to take to me every day I get on the bench. My office gave me a picture, and it spelled out the word justice. And when I reflect back on what the great debaters debated in 1930, again, this is before Brown, and they talked about the fact that they saw folks being hung, and the fact that they had to press their face against the wall and hide, and that oppression was very vibrant back then. The chant for them may have been, how long, not long. But King said it best, the arc of the universe is long, but it does have a tendency to bend towards justice. If we learn to live together, walk together, sing, everything that you're doing here today, and the leaders of this day, a beautiful day, then we very much know that even though the arc of the universe, regard to oppression, the slavery that I talked about, up from slavery and all that thing is true, and we look back on that, we know that it does have a tendency for those who are believers in faith and lean back on those who I had to lean on, just like me, that it does bend towards justice. In the 16 years that I have the possibility of serving on this bench, should I be so favored to reach the age of 70, I'm 54 now, I will have a chance to sign many, many orders. I will have a chance to see many of your faces, your children, your grandchildren, hopefully not my own. But I will take with me every day, not only my religious faith, but the fact that I know for sure that King's chant, how long, no, not long, the end of it is still meaningful to me. That even though we go through these oppressions, that I will have a chance to be a contributor to the fact that the time for justice is always, this is a great debater said, right now. And that I will be a participant in making sure that the arc of the universe, although it be long, that I will contribute to, at least in Montgomery County, that it bends towards justice. Thank you.
We want to thank the Honorable Garrett Page for that invigorating message there, and we thank him for taking this time. It was quite an event trying to get him here, and I promised him that we would have him back at the courthouse to continue with justice. Justice is right now. That's what he said, and we would have him back at the courthouse at a reasonable time. But I would be amiss if I would not, at this time, like and get a photo together of, in the room now has walked the Honorable Horace Davenport, the retired judge. And he is here. I've asked him to come, and if he can come over. He doesn't want to say anything. He said he didn't prepare anything, but I know he always has a few words somewhere in his heart. So you can say something to us right now. Yeah.
First, I should apologize for coming in at 10 o'clock, but that was the hour that I was given where this affair would start. So I showed up at 10 o'clock. And apparently I was not presented one of these programs earlier, and I see that it's at 9 o'clock. So I apologize to you, Judge Page, and I apologize to all of the participants. I'm delighted to be here. I didn't get all of Judge Page's speech, but I had no ambitions of becoming a judge because I didn't think there ever would be a black judge in Montgomery County, but I was hoping there would be one day. My path was a little different from his. I was just hoping that I could be a successful lawyer. Of course, I didn't have any lawyers to guide me. It was a matter of guiding myself. But some of the old-timers took me in hand and told me that my word was my bond. And that was the lesson which I learned early on. Never give your word unless you intend to live up to it. If you intend to live up to it, do a good job. If we served as models or roles for the people who came along later, like Garrett Page or others, we are blessed that we did something right. I know that Judge Page will be a wonderful judge. I've noticed and watched him over the last 20 to 25 years, most of which time I have been a senior judge. And he has worked assiduously, he's worked constantly, and he has lived up to his word. He told you what his age was. Would you like to know mine? I'm already 91. Good Lord has spared me a few days. I hope to be around for a few more days. I don't work anymore for money. I work now for pleasure. I should quit now unless you have a question or two which you want to ask. I'd rather answer questions rather than make speeches. Anybody have a question they want to ask me?
Sir, can you explain the power of mentorship? The power of mentorship.
The power of mentorship seems to me that a person wants an example. A mentor is someone who is interested in seeing someone else come along in his or her path, and he tries to show him or her how to move along in the right path, to reach where the mentor is. I don't know whether I'm explaining it fully to you.
You know that, that's great.
It's really taking an interest in the mentee and setting an example for him. And actually serving as a mentor, the mentee makes the mentors keep on the straight and narrow. Because if you're setting an example for somebody, you better be sure you're setting the right example so it sort of curves you in those at times when you may want to run it. And I don't mean W-O-N-D-E-R, I mean W-A-N-D-E-R. Is there another question? No, there's too many people in here not to have a question. The big brothers and the incident thank Brother Jackson.
Get that in, get that in.
The big brothers and the big sisters did not exist when I came along. I'm glad to see that it has been developed along the way. Brother Jackson is doing a wonderful job. The big brothers and the big sisters are doing a wonderful job. And I hope that they continue to do a marvelous job. Thank you very much.